0 present. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingle, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Dingle of Michigan.
Recorded vote was requested. Those in support of a request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote, kinda.
The Dingle Amendment increases Food and Drug Administration funding by $49 million, partially restoring cuts in food safety programs. Again, 2-minute voting underway in the House right now. The Senate gavelled in this morning at 10 to continue work on economic development programs. Senators have been debating amendments related to ethanol tax credits and storage. Votes on those amendments are scheduled for 2 p.m. Eastern. You can see that debate and those votes live on C-SPAN 2 when they occur.
This vote, the ayes are 178, the nays are 241. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for a recorded vote on an amendment printed in the congressional record offered by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which the further proceedings were postponed and in which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
12 more amendments related to Agriculture Department funding. And this is the amendment brought by Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, providing that amounts made available for agriculture buildings and facilities and rental payments are reduced by $13 million. During a hearing on the Defense Department budget yesterday, Secretary Robert Gates said that most governments lie to each other. That's the way business gets done. And we took your phone calls on that this morning on Washington Journal. You can see that segment, by the way, anytime at cspan.org, along with the Defense Secretary's briefing yesterday. Well, today, Secretary Gates is giving his final Defense Department briefing. He is stepping down at the end of the month, and you'll be able to see that briefing today live on C-SPAN 3. It gets underway at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Mr. Gene Green of Texas. Mr. Gene Green of Texas votes aye.
The ayes are 167, the nays are 252. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for recorded vote on amendment number 23 printed in the congressional record offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 23 printed in the congressional record offered by Mr. Gibson of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
As Agriculture Department Appropriations amendment voting continues, according to CQ this afternoon, the Senate Judiciary Committee approved by a vote of 11-7 an amended bill to extend the term of FBI Director Robert Mueller by 2 years. The panel tabled by 11-7 a GOP substitute amendment to instead create a new 2-year term of service for the director subject to Senate confirmation. It still needs to go to the full Senate for approval.
Or two.
Mrs. Elmers. Mrs. Elmers votes no. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan votes no. Mr. Waxman. Mr. Waxman votes no. Ms. Smith. Off aye on no for Ms. Smith. Off no on aye for Mr. Clark of Michigan. Mr. Landry. Off no on aye for Mr. Landry.
Now on this vote, the ayes are 221, the nays are 198. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, which the proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed on a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon.
Recorded vote was requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device. 2 minutes.
This is now the 10th of 21 amendment votes to Agriculture Department Appropriations for 2012. The Blumenauer of Oregon amendment prohibits the use of funds to pay salaries and expenses of agriculture personnel to provide benefits described in the Food Security Act of 1985 to a person or legal entity in excess of $125,000. From Politico this afternoon, Vivek Kundra, who is the first ever federal chief information officer, is planning to leave the White House in August, according to sources. He's held the position for 2.5 years. He's leaving the administration for Harvard, although it's unclear if he'll be teaching or taking a more research-oriented post. As the CIO in the Office of Management and Budget, he was responsible for overseeing $80 billion in federal information technology projects.
1 minute remaining. The nays are 262. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 1, offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, on which further proceedings were postponed, and the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment 1, offered by Mr. King of Iowa.
A recorded vote's been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
The King Amendment prohibits the use of funds to make payments relating to the final settlement of claims from Pigford v. Glickman. Now, that is a class action lawsuit against the Department of Agriculture, alleging racial discrimination in its allocation of farm loans and assistance between the years 1983 and 1997. That lawsuit ended with a settlement where the U.S. government agreed to pay African-American farmers $50,000 each if they had attempted to get USDA help, but they failed. To date, about $1 billion has been paid or credited to those farmers.
This vote, the ayes are 150.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim. Use the machine.
Mrs. Lowy. Mrs. Lowy votes no. Ms. Jakowski. Ms. Jakowski votes no. Mr. Stutzman. Mr. Stutzman votes aye.
Are you ready? Let's try again.
Yep.
Okay, close.
Mrs. Smith.
She is an off no on.
Off no aye for Mrs. Smith.
Oh, the ayes are 155, the nays are 262. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is request for a recorded vote on amendment number 2, offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, which further proceedings were postponed, in which the ayes prevail by a voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment 2, offered by Mr. King of Iowa.
Recorded vote was requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is another alleged 2-minute vote.
We are on the 12th of 21 amendment votes, 2-minute votes for Agriculture Department appropriations. This is the Garrett of New Jersey amendment number 22. The Associated Press reporting this afternoon, high-tech detective work has failed to solve a puzzle from the Watergate scandal that destroyed Richard Nixon's presidency. Forensic scientists assembled by the National Archives have been examining 2 pages of notes from a June 1972 White House meeting, looking for clues about what was said during an 18-and-a-half-minute gap in a recording of that session. They explored impressions in the paper, analyzed ink, and they hoped that they would find evidence of missing notes on the conversation between Richard Nixon and aide H.R. Haldeman, but the archives said today the effort didn't unravel that mystery. That meeting came after burglars tried to, Richard Nixon broke into the Democratic headquarters. The question of what President Nixon knew and when was the key, and it caused a sensation when investigators learned that the 18-and-a-half minutes had been erased.
The ayes are 240, the nays are 176. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 22, printed in the Congressional Record by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 22, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey.
Recorded vote is requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. 2-minute vote.
And a little bit of confusion on my part. Members just voted on the King Amendment. They are now voting on the Garrett Amendment, blocking some funds for the Commodities Futures Trading Commission.
Ms. Fox.
Aye.
Ms. Fox votes aye. Mr. Meeks.
Vote no.
Mr. Meeks votes no.
Amendment. The ayes are 231, the nays are 189. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business, the request for recorded vote, amendment number 29, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevail by a voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 29, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
As amendment voting continues, this from the Associated Press this afternoon. An announcement is expected later today from Congressman Anthony Weiner that he will be resigning his House seat. He's been on a leave of absence from the House, and earlier this week he said he'd be entering treatment of some sort after confirming that he'd sent lewd photos and exchanged inappropriate messages online with several women. According to one official, Congressman Weiner telephoned House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Steve Israel of New York, said yesterday evening to tell them of his plans. You'll be able to see that, or actually hear that briefing when it happens, on C-SPAN radio. It'll also be available on cspan.org.
One minute remaining. Any member wishing to change a vote? This vote, the ayes are 180, the nays are 230. Any member still needs a vote?
Ms. Sutton. Ms. Sutton votes aye.
This vote, the ayes are 181, the nays are 237. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is request for a recorded vote on an amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Solis, on which the further proceedings were postponed, in which the ayes prevail by a voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Scalise of Louisiana.
Recorded vote's been requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Please stay in the chamber. This is a 2-minute vote.
Votes on 6 amendments remain to Agriculture Department Appropriations for 2012. After amendments, we expect a procedural motion, 10 minutes of debate on that, and then a vote on final passage, followed by a 5-minute vote on the journal. which should wrap up voting for the week in the House.
The yeas are 238, the nays are 179. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 28 printed in the congressional record offered by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, on which the further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 28, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Recorded vote was requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. 2-minute vote.
As amendment voting continues, this from Politico this afternoon. Michelle Bachmann book is a go. Her co-author will be John Fund. This is according to the New York Times. Representative Bachmann of Minnesota has made a deal to publish her memoir, selling a book to Sentinel, which is a conservative imprinted Penguin. The book is tentatively expected to be released this fall. John Fund is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Her assist her with the writing of the book.
The ayes are 182, the nays are 235. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on an amendment printed in the congressional record offered by the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono, on which proceedings were postponed and on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Hirono of Hawaii.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
From the Hill this afternoon, Boehner says House could move to cut funding for Libya. House Speaker John Boehner today said the Obama administration failed to answer all his questions about the U.S. mission in Libya and raised the possibility that the House would move to cut off funding for the operation. In response to demands from the House, the administration released a 32-page report arguing that the Libya mission does not need congressional authorization because the U.S. military engagement there doesn't amount to hostilities. Congressman Boehner said that explanation doesn't fly with him. Ohio Congressman Dennis Kucinich is one of 9 congressmen who is suing the President and Defense Secretary for military action in Libya without first seeking congressional approval. Congressman Kucinich was a guest on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see that segment on our website, cspan.org.
On this vote, the ayes are 288.
Mrs. Bachman. Ms. Bachman voted no.
On this vote, the ayes are 288. The nays are 132. The motion is adopted. Request The unfinished business request for a recorded vote on amendment number 38 printed in the congressional record offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Holden, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 38, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Holden of Pennsylvania.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. 2 minutes.
Votes on 3 amendments remaining to Agriculture Department appropriations for the year 2012. After amendments, we expect a procedural motion. There will be 10 minutes of debate on that, then a vote on final passage, followed by a 5-minute vote on the journal, and that should wrap up legislative work for the day in the House. Members right now voting on the Holden Amendment, which reduces the amount made available in the bill by nearly 6% to restore various mandatory farm bill programs.
Does any member wish to change the vote? On this vote, the ayes are 84, the nays are 335. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Campbell, on which the further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Campbell of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic devices. It's a 2-minute vote. This vote, the ayes are 132, the nays are 287. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, on which the further proceedings were postponed, and the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
As amendment voting continues on the House floor, members have moved on to the Blackburn Amendment, which reduces the amount made available in the bill across the board by 5%.
On this vote, the ayes are 109, the nays are 310. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 1 offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, on which further proceedings were postponed, which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment 1, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
This amendment, again, 2-minute voting continuing on the floor of the House. This amendment prohibits the use of funds to be used for the construction of any ethanol blender pump or any ethanol storage facility. This is tangentially related to work the Senate is doing on economic development programs. Senators have been debating amendments related to ethanol tax credits and storage, and votes on those amendments are scheduled for 2 o'clock Eastern. You can see that debate and the votes live on C-SPAN 2. This vote, the ayes are 283, the nays are 128. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 2, offered by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, on which the further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment 2, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their vote by electronic device. 2 minutes.
As voting continues on the House floor, in about an hour or so, we expect an announcement from New York Congressman Anthony Weiner that he'll be resigning his House seat. He has been on a leave of absence from the House. According to an official source, Congressman Weiner telephoned House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Steve Israel of New York yesterday to tell them of his plans. You will be able to hear that on C-SPAN radio and on cspan.org. Again, that briefing is expected at 2 p.m. Eastern.
The ayes are 186, the nays are 228. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, on which the further proceedings were postponed, on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Lipinski of Illinois.